been the case in pretty much all across Europe, that the public sector, which to some extent replicates the work that used to be done in the family, to the extent that it's care work, it's teaching, it's looking after people, is largely staffed by women, which for a period has been not such a bad thing because there's been a security of employment in the public sector.
Not anymore. I should say that when it comes to the recession as a whole, men are faring very badly too. They've lost more jobs so far than women have, mainly because it's the private sector that's taken the hit until now. The OECD has referred to it as the man-cession. But the budget cuts are now hitting the public sector, which employs twice as many women as men. In addition, women draw more of the benefits that are being slashed as well. Pregnancy grants, obviously, but also child and housing benefits. Dr. Sheila Lawler, who heads the right-of-centre think tank Politeia, was worrying about benefits back in 2006 when she wrote a pamphlet called Forever Enslaved. She argues that the risk to women's equality comes not from cutting benefits, as the Fawcett Society believes, but from dishing them out in the first place.
Many feminists have seen men as the patriarch on whom women were forced to depend for income, for status, for ownership, for any freedom in society. However, I think that as that position has been eroded, the state has moved in to take its place. This may sound a good idea, but in fact, what you tend to find when government singles out a certain group for specific treatment, it turns them into dependents and it weakens their positions as members of the human race. Now we see women dependent on the state for top-up benefits, for certain opportunities, albeit very limited opportunities, to work, for the rejigging of the law, where the state treats them as a separate race, a gender apart, just as men in the old days, by custom, law, tradition, treated their wives or their daughters as a race apart.
Here we go again, Mars and Venus institutionalised in policy. But is it a problem if women look to the state for support? Lizzie Dearden doesn't think so.
I grew up with a single mother and it was just me and her. My mum worked full time, she always has, but we lived on working tax credits. We relied on free school meals. We had quite a lot of allowance from my school and provisions put in, with school uniform, help with trips, grants, that kind of thing. If I'd grown up with less support, I doubt I would have reached this level of education or this standard of living.
The benefit cuts won't affect only those dismissed as welfare scroungers by some ministers, but also people like Lizzie Dearden and her mum. That's what the Fawcett Society is trying to avoid by seeking a judicial review of the budget. Chief Executive Kerry Goddard.
There's a very clear law in the UK. The government had a duty to consider how the budget would impact on men and women and whether or not it would further or worsen women's inequality. The budget was decided without any consideration, we believe, as to whether it would make women's equality better or worse. And this is very much a feminist issue. You think about policy generally, but in particular economic policy, women's rights tend to be at best on the margins, and actually we are over 50% of the population. It's not just gender blind, I'd say it's actually gender regressive.
Why take this particular course of action? Why pursue a legal case?
What we want to achieve is a recognition by government and a declaration by the courts that the budget as stands is unlawful. Pursuing a legal case of the Fawcett Society was a really big decision. We've been around since the 1860s in the campaign for the women's right to vote, and we've never taken a legal challenge before in our history. We took a legal challenge because we were so concerned at the potential threat to women's rights and women's inequality posed by the current budget decisions that would impact on women and men's lives for a generation. And I know for a fact that as a direct response to the legal challenge, all departments in government have been looking again very carefully at what their equality duties are.
All the government is obliged to do is consider the impact on equality of its decisions. Once that box has been ticked, there's no legal mechanism to prevent Parliament passing a budget that disproportionately disadvantages women. The Fawcett Society is pushing for a public discussion of these issues. It says that its headline-grabbing campaign has given it a fillip. Membership is up, and donations from women of all ages have been coming in. But there haven't been protests, Dagenham style. Lizzie Dearden isn't surprised. She says young feminists have other goals.
I'll know the aim of feminism has been achieved when I can go out wearing a short skirt and someone won't grope me, or a prostitute can get raped and someone won't say they deserved it. And you can walk down the street on a dark night and not fear the man walking behind you. I think that's what we're aiming for now. Equality, safety, and freedom from blame, really.
Some second-wave feminists look at younger women and say this is not what we were fighting for. They think they're sexually liberated. In fact, they're colluding in their own oppression.
I don't know how to respond to that, because for all I know I could be one of the people colluding in oppression and not knowing it. To me, it's a massive grey area. I think if a woman is genuinely following her own desires and her own urges and acts on it how she would, with sexual partners, wearing what she wants, even being a lap dancer or a sex worker, if that is purely her own desire, to me that's okay. But if on any level the woman feels the expectation to sleep with lots of people, the pressure to wear revealing clothes, and the reasons for what she does comes from outside society, I think that is negative.
This young woman is actually quite right in saying that it's important not to stigmatise lap dancers, not to see prostitutes as victims.
Professor Angela McRobbie of Goldsmiths College, London.
At the same time, what slightly troubles me is this idea that life comprises of choices, and that individuals, as long as they can kind of tally up that what they are doing is the outcome of their own volition, then it's okay. It completely implies that society comprises of choosing individuals for whom society ultimately then has no responsibility.
What do you think the consequences of individualism are for feminism?
Well, individualism has been the most negative and damaging and pernicious force within the kind of field of young women's emancipation.
To be sure, individualism doesn't naturally lend itself to collective action, though of course the desire to be free to live on your own terms was a motivating force in the second wave of feminism too. But the cultural climate has changed since the 70s. Individualism is now the dominant ideology, which, Professor McRobbie believes, may make it easier for governments to reassure us that persistent inequalities aren't an urgent and social problem, but a private and manageable one. She fears governments fob us off.
Obviously, women haven't entirely achieved equality. There still is the glass ceiling, but so much has been achieved that government can be relied upon in this kind of gradualist way to carry on improving women's position. Not only have governments, in a sense, said they'll look after women and therefore you no longer need feminism, consumer culture also pitches in and says, we can be supporters of women, we can champion young girls, and again, they no longer need feminism. And one of the ways in which this is done is through a vocabulary of individualism. For example, women's magazines are completely oriented towards perfecting the self, being in control, reading more self-help books. Feminism was about groups, about a kind of unselfish attitude. There was a kind of ideal of womanhood which was far beyond, whether you felt low self-esteem.
So low that they're seeking new and disturbing solutions, according to Catherine Redfern, who established the F-Word website.
We've had emails from teenagers who've been really influenced by what they've read on our website, and it's had a positive impact on them. One example I can think of was a girl who read an article which was reviewing a TV programme about labiaplasty.
These are designer vaginas, which a lot of feminists are getting very upset about.
That's right, yeah. And she said, after reading this review, I feel like I don't need this surgery anymore, I'm happy with my body.
Girls at a very young age have eating disorders, body dysmorphia. There's all sorts of issues around plastic surgery, a huge, massive beauty industry that starts very, very, very young. This is a health and safety issue.
Dr. Jessica Ringrose is a senior lecturer in sociology of gender and education at the Institute of Education in London. She conducted a groundbreaking and disquieting study of how 14 to 16